are going to address that intersection with some work they've been doing in Alaska's interior on the intersection of fire, terrestrial ecosystems, and permafrost. And so we've got Dr. Vladimir Romanovsky from the University of Alaska Fairbanks Geophysical Institute. He's a professor of geophysics there and a global expert on permafrost dynamics. And then also Brian Buma, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Integrative Biology at the University of Colorado, Denver, but has quite a bit of experience in Alaska and does work here still from when he was here at University of Alaska Southeast. And definitely has a lot of expertise in the interaction of disturbances on forested landscapes in the American West and in Alaska. And so between the two of them, they put together a really interesting project in the interior that we're going to invite them to talk about today. Each of them will have about 20 minutes for their presentation, and then we'll do discussion afterwards. I think I can't see the chat, so I can't moderate that, but if you have specific questions to address, if you can also add them in the chat so that we have a record of that in case we don't get to all of them, that would be fantastic. So with that, I think we're ready to go.
Yep.
And
yeah, no worries. It is Brian up first, I believe.
Great. Can you still hear me?
Cool. Let me just go. Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Sorry. So we'll have Brian Buma start us off then.
Cool. Yeah. Let me share my screen. Okay. Hopefully it's loading for you. Y'all see it?
Yes.
Cool. Alrighty. So yeah, I was excited to present some of the stuff we've been doing. I see some folks on the call that have seen some of this before, but hopefully y'all find it interesting. So yeah, I'm Brian Buma. I'm now at the University of Colorado. I was faculty at the University of Southeast for many years, and so we are continuing all these projects in Alaska. So the project that Vlad and I will both be presenting on is part of a larger group, and I'll just give you a really brief intro to that. A larger group headed by Melissa Lukash, who just moved to Oregon, University of Oregon. But the group involves landscape modelers, field ecologists, permafrost, and hydrologists at the University of Idaho. Oh, and soil microbial ecologist at Florida, Jason Vogel. Many of you probably know him. And the goal is to get an understanding, integrative understanding of carbon dynamics in boreal forests that are seeing an increase in fire frequency. And it's got a lot of parts to do that, obviously, and hence the wide range of interests. The reason we're studying this is obviously fires are a big deal in the interior, and repeat fires are becoming more and more of an interest to us as ecologists, but because they have such a potential to change the ecosystem, which I'll get into in a second, they're of interest to a lot of people and of particular relevance to permafrost. So real briefly, there have been a lot of fires in the interior over the past 100 years, and obviously going back further. There's a couple ways they're tallied. There's, of course, the amazing Alaska Large Fire Database, which goes back to 1940 and has perimeters. And then since the 80s, we have satellite data. There's debates about which one's better. They're really just different. If you just look at the MTBS, which is the Monitoring Trends in Burn Severity, that's a Landsat-based fire distribution maps. In interior forests, depending on the ecoregion you're looking between 18 and 29% have burned in the past 40 years, 38 years or so. And of those, about 4% have reburned. So they burned twice in that observation period. So if you, the thing you're looking at on the left is the actual map from the Alaska Fire database. On the bottom right is the cumulative distribution function for reburn. So what we see is that there's not a lot of reburning for the first 10 to 15 years, but then we do start to see the rate of reburning increase. So there is a short delay in which the landscape is not particularly flammable, but then it can burn again. And that's of relevance because we know that short interval fires or reburns can shift stand composition pretty dramatically. So, you get a fire in a black spruce forest, which is the forest we're focusing on, areas that were black spruce before. That kicks off serotiny, kicks off regeneration of black spruce, typically of very high regeneration densities. Those grow back. If you burn them before they mature, meaning they start producing a substantial seed bank again, what happens is you lose the conifers for the most part, because there's simply no seed left. You burn them off before they can regenerate, and you get a shift to deciduous forests. So that shift in stand composition is often presumed to go along with a decline in potential future fires, because birch, aspen, willows, they're generally considered less flammable. It also has implications for the carbon cycle. You have faster growing above ground carbon, but potentially lower soil carbon, less soil insulation, and all that. But for the purposes of reburning, that decline has been a negative feedback that we've put a lot of hope in, I think, in many places, as a way to dampen down future fire frequency despite a warming climate. But of course, we know that's not necessarily always going to be the case. It's certainly possible that deciduous forests can burn also. And as it gets warmer and in some places drier, or at least more water stressed, we could see those things continuing to burn. So that's what we've been looking at as part of this project. That's what my group has been looking at as part of this project, is getting empirical data, getting field data on regeneration in deciduous forests that reburn. So areas that have actually burned 3 times in a very short period. So we observe that shift that we've seen in a lot of places with short interval fires, but then we burn that area again. And the question is, what does it look like? Does it just stay the same, or do we see like significant structural shifts that may impact things like permafrost and radiative balance in the ground and future fire frequency? So we've been working for this project in 2 areas, and then via remote sensing brought more broadly, but I'll just show you data from 2 areas. One on the Haul Road, which we call our upland site, because it's sort of that gentle rolling topography that's fairly well drained. And then one pretty close to Central, which we call our lowland site. It's flat. They're actually about the same elevation, but the lowland site is flatter. Both have permafrost in shadier areas, and definitely in bottomlands. They're kind of on the northern edge of the discontinuous permafrost. All our control sites have permafrost in them. And what we did is we went out and we put in a whole bunch of plots in areas that either hadn't burned or had burned once, twice, or 3 times since the 40s. We used the Alaska Fire History Database to get our broad sites, and then we used things like tree coring, tree anatomy of downed wood, age dendrochronology methods to make sure they actually did burn. This is the Dalton site, the Haul Road site. Yeah, I mean, that's the Haul Road site. The fires were in 67, 91, and then 2003 or 5, depending on your spot. And then our lowland site, like I said, is near Central. It's kind of on this flattish area here. This is what those sites look like. Obviously, you've all seen, well, I presume all of you seen an unburned black spruce forest. One burn sites, if it just burned once, it looks like that perfectly healthy post-fire boreal forest ecosystem. Lots of coniferous regeneration, lots of standing dead still, of course. Beautiful places to be. The 2 short interval fires really do exhibit that transition to a deciduous forest that we'd expect. What you see here is a lot of birch for the most part. There's very little coniferous regeneration. There was, I mean, you can see the still standing corpses of the little baby trees. You can see one right here, but there wasn't enough seed developed to get any sort of substantial regen. There's of course a little bit, or the occasional white spruce that blows in from someone else or somewhere else, but not a lot. But then the 3 burn is really fascinating because it still keeps changing. Like this is what this place looked like. It's really close. It just burned again, and it's got a much more open woodland savanna type feel to it. You get much more clumpier trees. There's less of them, a lot more exposed mineral soil, some more moss on the ground. And it's just a different environment. It's much more open, it's much warmer, less shady, it feels drier. This is the data to go along with that. So if we look at the densities of the stems, and this will feed into what Vlad's going to talk about, because this really does influence things like radiative balance and trajectories, and this will go into the modeling too. What we see is in our upland and lowland sites, both end up in the same place after 3 fires, but they take a slightly different path to get there. So I'll start with the upland plots on the right. The conifer densities is quite high after 1 fire, as you'd expect. There's a lot of post-fire regen, and then if you burn it twice, you get very, very little regen in the conifer department, and after 3 fires, you essentially get 0 on most plots. The deciduous composition goes down too, but it always stays a decent bit higher. In the lowland plot, we found a little bit higher resilience of the conifers to 2 fires. We are interpreting that as a thicker organic layer, just less disruption to the organic layer, probably a little bit less intense fire. All these plots completely burned, everything died, but presumably a slightly less intense fire. But after 3 fires, you still see the complete loss of conifers and sort of dominance of deciduous. They do look different in terms of what's comprising them, but again, kind of the same story. And this is the upland site. I apologize, it sort of switched, so now upland's on the left. Black spruce proportions are in red, and it essentially goes to 0. Both cases goes to 0. Our upland sites are now dominated mostly by birch with some willow component, and our lowland sites are dominated by willow with a little bit of aspen component. But both of them look different from the 2 and 3 term burns. So you reburn a deciduous forest, you burn it again real fast after it gets started, and you still do see changes. Just to bring that picture back, you do see that continued transition from a deciduous dominated sort of beautiful birch area to this more, like I said, savanna sort of thing. This has some interesting implications for feedbacks with fire. So I'll get to that in a second, but you can imagine that this is a very different abiotic environment than this one. And the implications for permafrost specifically are canopy loss. You have much more solar radiation hitting the ground, especially if you keep burning it. Almost regardless of what's coming back, if you keep burning it, you're going to have more solar input to the ground. The compositional change strongly controls how much organic matter is on the ground. With that deciduous forest, you have obviously a much faster turnover of the organic layer on the ground. It's thinner. You don't get those thick moss layers you see in the black spruce forests. And then there's potential implications for the way those plants are interacting with the water table as well. So, excuse me, we actually have some ongoing work along this to sort of continue to explore these sorts of things. Last winter, we tried to put out some temperature loggers to look at snow accumulation, differences in snow accumulation that you'd expect to correspond with these differences in density. May not go too much with what species are there or not, but just in terms of overall just how the trees are arranged structurally. Jeremy helped pick up some of those loggers this summer because we were locked out this summer. We have the modeling work, which I'll introduce on the next couple of slides very briefly, and then some fun work on fire feedbacks. Like I said at the beginning, we expect after 2 burns and a deciduous takeover, you'd expect some sort of decline in fire likelihood, at least because of the wetter leaves and just the difference in the species. But as you get to that more open savanna-like system, it is a much different feel to it. Wind can get into that stand easier. Ground fires, there's more grass. It's a potentially different fire environment. And we actually have some funding to look at that. We were supposed to do it last summer, but unfortunately, due to COVID, we weren't able to get a team up there within the constraints of the budget. So we're planning on it for next year. We have another proposal in the works to take that work, when it's done, and works with some very high resolution fire modelers who work with a physics-derived model, Fire Tech out of Los Alamos, to model fire at a fairly fine scale in these forests. Now, the overall project is feeding into the Landis modeling environment, and these are slides from Melissa Lukash, so I can't talk too much about this, but Melissa Lukash is taking our veg data, and she is taking the hydrologists on the teams work to look at water flow up and down, and she's working with Vlad and getting temperature data. And what they're doing is they're linking Landis-2, which if you're not familiar with it, is a very, relatively fine-scaled vegetation composition model, a land model that is pretty highly specialized in disturbance, climate, veg interactions, and linking it with a model called SHA, which models heat and water balance in the soil, GIPL, which does soil temperature, and then DAM, which does soil dynamics as well, soil moisture, I believe, to try and get at permafrost. So where they are now, they've done a pretty good job modeling fires. So they've got the fire dynamic working with their landscape, and so we're starting to get the first runs coming out, like literally this last week, in terms of future fire frequency, deciduous up here, historical climate. This is sort of what they model on a neutral landscape, and this is in the future. And then conifer versus deciduous cover types. You see that they're modeling a much larger deciduous takeovers you'd kind of expect in the future. As far as the permafrost goes, though, what they're doing is still trying to match up the modeled soil temperatures at multiple layers, going down a couple meters with climatological data. So the current challenge, like I asked her this morning, their current challenge is linking the GFDL climate stream tracks with their data, because those things seem warmer than observed starting in the 2000s and getting worse. But I mean, that's just a modeling challenge that'll be overcome fairly soon. And we should have, at the end of this, like when this is done, what we'll have is a well-calibrated model that can incorporate that 2 to 3 short interval burns or transition, as well as the 1 to 2 short interval transition. A landscape dynamics model that can take all that, take a climate stream, and then also model the prevalence and persistence of permafrost with actual soil temperatures at various steps in space. It's running at 4 hectares resolution. So all in all, it's actually fairly fine resolution. And we're currently focusing on the interior ecoregions, more so in the east than like the YK, not going out to like the YK Delta or anything like that. So the current timeline, last slide before I pass it to Vlad. The vegetation, the region paper is in press, so that should be online any day, I hope. That was authored by Kate Hayes, PhD student in my lab. The carbon impacts paper, so we're also getting ecosystem carbon, which includes above ground soil and a charcoal component, a black carbon component. That one's in prep, that hopefully will be out for review within a few months. Permafrost model is running, and they expect to submit their first paper to ecological modeling. Probably it'll be a model development paper in December, with results to be published shortly thereafter. And then a regional reburning model is in prep and hopefully submitted in December based on satellites and paleoecology. And as I mentioned, that fire feedback investigation that I hinted at was unfortunately delayed, but 2021, hopefully. So to sum that up, I do want to highlight there's a ton of people on this. I'm sure Vlad probably has the same slide. In particular, we had amazing fieldwork help over the last several years from folks like Kyle Martini, Kyle Turchik, Vishnu Kodichurla, and then actually Kristen Olson, who maybe some of you know now. She did a REU on this project through my lab, and she's now a PhD student at UAF. So say hi if you see her. And with that, that's my 15 minutes of fame. I will pass it along to Vlad. Once I stop sharing. Go for it.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Brian. It's a great description of our project. And in my presentation, I actually will be mostly talking about kind of theoretical things, consider impact of wildfires on stability of permafrost. And of course, it applies for what just Brian described, but it's more like on a more deeper explanation why permafrost is affected by fire. And I just put some few, not complete list of very important impacts or consequences of the fire to the stability of permafrost. It's not complete list, but I put in a kind of order by significance what I think. And we'll start with and spend most of the time, of course, the first one is removal of surface organic layer. And Brian already mentioned a couple of times that this removal makes huge impact on permafrost. And if you ask any people who involved in this, so why it's so? And an answer will be, well, it's simple. Of course, by now, so many publications describing these impacts, nobody say that, well, because fire is so hot and permafrost start to thaw. No, of course, people know that most of the impact is because of changes in the environment and change in surface conditions, and it's exactly right. So if you ask, most of the people would say, well, it's no brainer here. You remove the insulative layer from the surface, and of course it will be warmer, it will be thawing deeper, and it's right. It's right, but up to a limit, because see, it's definitely happened with any kind of fire, any severity of fire, that summer thaw will increase. That's definitely will happen. Now, will increase in this active layer. However, if permafrost will be still be there, it means that every winter this even thicker active layer will be freezing completely. Just by this removal of this insulation, you will not get deeper of thaw in permafrost than, well, say 1.5 meter in our conditions with silt as a major kind of a component of the soil. So if permafrost is still there, the layer, which will be not frozen during the summer, will be limited by 1.2, 1.5 meters. And it will be impact, of course, impact on hydrology, impact on other things. But we know that in interior Alaska, especially, the bigger masses of ice, they lie a little bit deeper. So somewhere like 1.8, 2 meters deep, but those big ice wedges starts and go down to 10 and 20 meters down. So what I'm trying to say that if it's just the increase in the active layer, it will be still limited impact on permafrost. So what we need for further kind of more severe impact is we need that permafrost will start to thaw deeper and deeper and deeper. And when it happened when the summer thaw is exceeding winter freezing. So it doesn't freeze completely because it's deep thaw. And then with the time, it turns into seasonally frozen layer, and permafrost start to decline and go in deeper surface of permafrost, deeper and deeper, and develop what we call it thallic, and that's where permafrost can really degrade deep enough. Then all other more serious processes can take on because of the ice content in the deeper permafrost. So for that, there is very simple and kind of straightforward parameter we should look at to figure out when this long-term thawing of permafrost will start. And this parameter is just simply, and this is on my graph on the right, is the temperature on the bottom of the layer which freeze and thaw during the summer. And this temperature, it's in case of stable permafrost, it's the same as permafrost table or permafrost surface, upper surface temperature. But if permafrost start to degrade deeper, So then it will be temperature at the bottom of seasonally frozen layer. So it's very simple parameter. And I mean, not simple to get, but it's straightforward at least. If temperature is below zero at this point, it means that permafrost is still stable. And the seasonally thawed layer will freeze completely during the winter. If this temperature is above 0 degrees Celsius, above this threshold, then permafrost will be degrading because the temperature at this level is above 0, so permafrost has no chance, and it starts to thaw deeper and deeper and deeper. So if you look, in this case, it's very kind of convenient way to look at the situation and to look also at the impact of forest fire on the permafrost. So in this slide, I show this kind of general temperature conditions in terms of mean annual temperature for different levels. So air temperature in interior Alaska is about between somewhere -2, -6. Lately, sometimes it's getting a little bit warmer, not getting that cold like it was in 70s or early 70s. Then temperature at the snow surface is about, well, in winter about the same. The very important point is the ground surface. Of course, ground surface is warmer. It's warmer because of insulation of the snow. It's very good insulator as well. So typically, we're getting at the point now, and for actually a few decades already, where temperature at this mean annual temperature, and I'm talking about mean annual temperatures, just, you know, it's simpler than seasonal variations, just mean annual. So at this point, for many years already, temperature is above 0 degrees Celsius. And it could be as high as +3 degrees here at this point, at the ground surface. And only some specific processes, physical processes just happening in this layer of freezing and thawing make permafrost still present at this, and I will talk about this specifically. We call this thermal offset. Let me say maybe one more thing about burning. So again, the idea that, and this is our, this is our organic layer here, which after fire will be burned. And like I said in the beginning, everybody say, well, yeah, definitely the depth of thaw will be deeper. However, because of removal of this insulation. However, in the winter, there is insulation will be absent as well. And it will be colder conditions for soil because there is no insulation in the winter. And the thing is that if the insulation works the same way in the summer and in the winter, they will compensate each other, and you will have no change in mean annual temperature in the soil, because well, it just removed insulation, and it's warmer in the summer but colder in the winter. So now, if you look more carefully, what is this thermal offset is, and on the right there is slide just showing this temperature profiles, mean annual. Again, I'm talking about mean annual temperatures at a couple of our sites around Fairbanks. You can see that permafrost is still stable and could be even as cold as -1, when temperature, mean annual temperature at the ground surface is somewhere between +1 and even +3. And the difference in temperature here is up to 3 degrees Celsius. So this thermal offset is very strong factor which keep our permafrost still stable even if ground temperature is already above 0 degrees Celsius. And this thermal offset is actually, we know how to calculate it. It's pretty, you know, not very complex formula to make it to make these calculations. So the key here is the degree days, summer degree days. It's just 365 years. And the main thing here is the ratio of thermal conductivities in that upper layer, which freezes and thaws every winter, and its ratio is the key. If this ratio will be equal to 0, I mean, if the ratio will be just 1, so those thermal conductivities will be the same. No, there will be no thermal offset at all. And on the contrary, the larger difference between thermal conductivity in the summer and thermal conductivity in the winter, the larger will be this thermal offset. So if you look back to this organic layer, the layer is very porous and very, there is lots of ice during the winter and water in the summer, or even drier in the summer. And because of this change, the ratio of these conductivities is huge. So for organic layer, this ratio is usually more than 2, the frozen versus the thawed. And even more, it could be up to 2.5 and even 3 in some cases. In the soil, in the mineral soil, there is also a ratio, of course, because it's wet and it's when it freezes, conductivity is higher. But the ratio usually less than 2, somewhere between 1.5 and 2. So removal of this layer of organic layer, which produced the major part of the thermal offset, can increase this temperature on the bottom of seasonally frozen thawed layer by 1 or even 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this is one of the strongest impact on temperature regime in permafrost, removal of the layer and decrease in the thermal offset. Now, the second thing also related to removal of organic layer, and people heard about thermal offset probably, but maybe what I will say now, it's maybe less known, but it is fact, and it's we have very good physical explanation of what's going on. But we know that also the impact, the warming effect of snow, which is in interior, could be between 3 and 6 degrees Celsius in terms of mean annual temperature. The warming effect of the same snow is strongly impacted or relates to the layer below the snow. So if the below snow is organic layer with lower thermal conductivity, closer thermal conductivity to snow, the warming impact of snow will be much less in the case compared to case when the mineral soil with much higher conductivity, maybe sometimes 5 times higher conductivity, is below the snow. So the thing is that exactly the same snow will provide much better insulation when you don't have this organic layer. So those this difference could be up to 1 degree Celsius. So altogether, if you combine these two effects of reducing negative thermal offset and increasing thermal insulation of snow, you can get 2.5 degree warmer conditions. And of course, in this case, temperature at this point at the bottom of seasonally frozen thawed layer will definitely cross that threshold of 0 degrees Celsius, and permafrost will start to thaw. So that's really the really physical reason why fire is so has so strong impact on permafrost and destabilization of permafrost. And we did some modeling some point just to illustrate this. Let's compare two sites, air temperature, two sites. Well, in this case, it's not fire, it's a farm, but there is no organic layer. And Bonanza Creek, it's normal conditions, black spruce forest. So air temperature is pretty much almost exactly the same because they situated in very similar climatic conditions. But the temperature at the ground surface in the summer is pretty much the same, almost no difference, but much warmer, much higher temperatures at the site with no organic layer. And for modeling, it's even more clear to show that the difference in these temperatures during the winter could be up to 5-10 degrees Celsius. So what happened after the fire? So it's not just increase in active layer, which is starts as increase in active layer, but is if fire was severe enough, the thaw of permafrost continue, beyond the increase in active layer. And instead of seasonally thawed layer, it start to freeze to some depth, but rest of the material is not frozen, so thallic develops. And development of thallic, and this is particular case, it's modeling, but it's for a real case of Rosy Creek fire in Bonanza Creek area. So the thallic can develop pretty rapidly. In about 10, 15 years, you can get the depth of this thallic 4 and more meters. And of course, the development of this thallic depends on severity of fire, climatic conditions at the site, at the time, and so on. So, but it's possible with knowledge of the physics of the process, it's possible to model it. And of course, this thallic can refreeze because in case of reestablishing of the surface vegetation and organic layer. So, and it's all can be very straightforwardly model it. And that's what part of this modeling efforts, what Brian was talking about. So now I have just a few minutes to stop at other things, and it will be just general considerations with that, without too much of the examples. So another one which could be important for permafrost stability is decrease in snow intercept by trees. And if the trees are gone, so you have open area. And with multiple fires, it's getting open more and more open, like Brian just showed you. And there is some data that in open area, accumulation of snow in interior Alaska is about, if you think about open area 100%, then in black spruce forest, typically it will be about 70% of snow in the open area. So it means that with removal of trees, you have not just increase and removal of organic layer, not just impact through the organic layer removal in the warming effect of snow, but snow itself getting thicker. Just a note that in the tundra, in shrub tundra, it could have opposite effect, because if shrubs are there will be some intercept of blowing snow, and you have more snow in the shrubs. After removal of shrubs, you may lose actually this snow. So it could be different a little bit, this impact in the tundra. So now, of course, we know also that at least for the few years after fire, soil moisture is changing and normally increasing for some period of years, and that also can impact the influence of or impact of fire on permafrost. This is more complicated. So in some cases, more water in the near surface may increase the warming of soil and increase the rate of thawing of permafrost. In some cases, because of the reestablishment of the thermal offset, it may be actually have opposite effect. And the last one is about albedo. The albedo may increase temperature of surface in the first year, maybe second, but that's actually this kind of this factor is very quickly the albedo going to normal, even higher after the fire, after the reestablishment of surface vegetation and its grasses and fireweed and so. And actually, albedo could be even higher than before fire, this black spruce forest. Another one that was mentioned in Brian's presentation is increase in insulation on the surface because of removal of shading kind of effect of trees. That's also some impact. But all these other impacts are relatively small compared to those what I just described and related to removal of the organic layer, because of changes in thermal offset and warming impact of snow. So that's pretty much the physics of the impact of fire and removal of organic material from the surface to the permafrost. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say today. And thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Brian and Vlad. Those are great presentations. And we have about 15 minutes left on the hour for questions. And I am still unable to see the chat box, so maybe we'll ask for those in a minute. But if anybody on the meeting has a question for either of our presenters, please ask.
No, 15 minutes.
This is Jennifer Barnes. I was going to ask Vladimir, I kind of missed because briefly you were talking about some of the soil moisture content and how that might affect the freeze-thaw cycle. I'm curious, in a lowland area that's burned that may have sphagnum mosses, which are oftentimes not completely burned down to mineral soil, but also are much higher moisture content holding moss type. Would that actually preserve the thermal freezing in that area, or would that be, I guess, what's the impacts because of that moss type?
Right. Well, what I was saying that it's a removal of vegetation, especially trees, may increase in surface moisture content. So I was not talking about wet sites, burned, originally wet sites compared to originally dry sites to burn. I was talking about, say, maybe originally relatively dry sites after burn, after removal of trees and organic layer, the moisture content may increase. That's what I was talking about. That's what was my reference. So what the impact of fire on moisture conditions. Now, in a wetter area and lowlands, typically, but not always, the fire severity is lower and burn happening only above the water level, pretty much in the soil, and they cannot go too much deeper. So first of all, the severity of fires generally lower, but the presence of water there and quick reestablishment of moss layer actually may reestablish permafrost relatively quickly. That's what observed in the past. So as soon as you have some survival on moss, and that will already diminish the impact of fire, or recovery of moss layer will reestablish permafrost, and relatively quickly. It takes just maybe a couple decades, and you may have all permafrost back in these areas.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Lorene Lynn with a question. Hello.
Go ahead,
okay.
Lorene.
Sure, go ahead.
In the slide, Vlad, where you showed post-fire, where the surface temperatures lowered again once the vegetation recovered, did you notice, was there any tracking of what vegetation was recovering, moss versus grasses versus fireweed, or even vegetation succession, and how that relates to post-fire temperature reduction in the surface temperatures?
What I showed, it was modeling, results of modeling. Of course, the very important, the trajectory of recovery. It's definitely very, very important. So the most effective, again, reestablishment of permafrost will be recovery of moss layer. So if it will be just still grassy vegetation and deciduous trees, the reestablishment of permafrost will be delayed a lot. So it will be much slower process. And actually in recent climate, it may never happen even. Reestablishment of dense moss layer will definitely give a chance of permafrost, near surface permafrost, to reestablish itself. And like I said, it could happen pretty quickly if the of course organic layer will take much longer to reestablish, but even some very surface vegetation and very thin organic layer at the surface may work as a preservation, or at least to stop further thawing of permafrost, at least that. And that's what we definitely observe, because in our site, observational site, we in the Rosa Creek, we observed that permafrost stopped to thaw farther deeper after about 15-20 years, and it was stay exactly the same for since the late, say, 90s up to 2015 or so, without much changes. And even some layer of permafrost, new layer of permafrost reformed between like maybe 1.5 meters and 2.5 meters. But after further warming, after 2014, this layer disappeared, new permafrost layer disappeared, and the talc can start to continue to get deeper, and now it's about 5.5 meters. So even in a warmer climate, reestablishment of moss can actually stabilize the permafrost situation, at least for some period of time, until more the warmer climate in the coming years.
We also have a question from the chat. Clayton Elder is asking, how does the presence of near surface ice wedges complicate the fire impacts on permafrost and or reestablishment of the organic layer?
Well, the presence of big masses of ice, depending on volume, of course, may completely change the surface conditions. If these big massive ice wedges start to thaw, that will be big changes in surface topography, not just micro topography, but developing a little bit larger kind of features like gullies and high-center polygons if in the beginning, but and it will change a lot in terms of hydrology. Generally, there'll be drier conditions, but to reach that point, and it's to reach that point, the permafrost has to degrade to the towards the top of these big masses. And what I'm saying, so if you don't have strong enough impact from the fire, even after fire, permafrost can recover and this ice will stay there. And even in terms of degradation, this ice could slow down the rate of thawing. However, if the rate will be enough to thaw enough ice, then because of changes in topography, there are some other processes, other feedbacks, and mostly positive feedbacks will turn on, and permafrost can start to degrade even faster because of the local topography, micro topography will be turned in. So it's definitely a very important threshold, and the environment and landscape after this massive ice starts to melt, they will change much more dramatically than just increase in active layer. I don't know, answer the question if. So it's really slow down a little bit of thawing, but because of you need more energy to melt ice generally. But if this still thawing going on, then you can have some positive feedbacks with further more rapid changes in the landscape. and hydrology.
Okay, we've got. Thanks for the detailed answers to those questions. We're learning a lot here. We have about 5 minutes left in the hour, and I skipped over introducing IARPC and both of the collaboration teams that are jointly hosting this call earlier. So unless there are any other burning or freezing questions that we need to get to, I'd like to give Ben Jones a couple minutes to talk about the Permafrost collaboration team. And then if there's any time left over, we'll talk about the Terrestrial Ecosystems collaboration team, the two teams that are jointly hosting this meeting. Steve, are there any other questions in the chat that seem relevant or really interesting that we need to get to before we close out?
We just had one more in the chat. Dima asks, will you add thaw subsidence in the list of consequences of wildfires? So maybe we can get a quick response to that one.
Well, I think I answered to this question in the previous my answer. Yes, it will, and it will trigger new processes, and usually this new process will actually physically positive feedbacks. So positive
Great.
in terms of in terms of that they will accelerate the thaw of permafrost.
Okay, awesome. So we did. I think Meredith recorded this, so it can be revisited if needed. And both talks are now available on the IARPC website, so you can go there and look at those graphics again if you need to. Ben, do you want to take a couple minutes and talk about the permafrost team?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to, Jeremy. But first, I was going to ask Brian a question, if that's okay, because I feel like he I got shorted there by going first and then not being able to field it. Is that okay, Brian? Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes, I've done a lot of flying around interior Alaska, and there's all these areas that are surrounded by like black spruce forest. They're on these like low ridges, low hills, but they're tundra vegetation. And I was wondering if you guys have looked at all at how fire regimes and repeat burning might have converted some of these areas that potentially used to be spruce forest, but they're now more alpine tundra.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I actually had that in the talk. I don't really have an answer to that, but I had the beginnings of what I'm doing just like in the past few months to get at that. So yeah, I've been wondering about that too. So, you know, we should be able to see the legacies of reburns on the landscape if it is this thing that does cause shifts for a long period of time, and it's not sort of a relatively new phenomenon. So what I've been doing is take FIA data. So we have the FIA data for the interior now, and map those onto the landscape, and then try and build essentially a model to predict areas likely to see reburns based on current patterns of reburns, because somehow we have to say, yeah, this area could have burned twice if we don't have any evidence for it, or 3 or 4 times. I'd say so far there's not like a huge link between areas that like look like current areas that have reburned in terms of their climate and topography and current vegetation patterns. So I'm not sure how strong that link is in the past, which could imply that either this sort of veg shift that we all document when we go out and we look at short interval burns, either it doesn't last as long as we think it does, or these are kind of new things, like the incidence of repeat fire is higher now than it has been in sort of the last several centuries. So another way to look at that is I've been working with some paleoecologists, and we've been trying to document like how common repeat fires were in the past. And that's hard to do because of just the resolution with the paleo data. So, you know, they can't get like yearly level records. They can usually get like decadal bins. And it looks like we have in the past 30 or 40 years seen more reburns than typically occurred over the last 10,000 years. So it is kind of a novel phenomenon. But all that to say, that's very preliminary, but that's how we're going about it, is taking FIA data and looking at what's in these forests, you know, in terms of their deciduous versus coniferous composition, And then asking, is this a place that we'd expect to have the potential for a short interval burn or not, based on the current model? Now, I should mention one other limitation. You mentioned tundra. So the FIA data is only in areas of 10% forest cover or more. So it's pretty much limited to forested or woodland areas. So the tundra areas haven't really been investigated, at least by us yet. It's a roundabout way of saying, I think it's an awesome question. I don't have an answer yet, but we're working on it.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks.
Well, that sounds like a good place to close it off. It sounds like there's plenty of opportunity at the intersection of these two fields, of course, to continue asking questions and the conversation. So we'll look for any follow-ups, and if there's any further traffic on this, go ahead and let us know so that we can incorporate it into the route forward. But we are at the top of the hour. So with that, I'd like to thank our two speakers, and also for Meredith for helping us organize this, and the Permafrost collaboration team for jointly organizing this with us. And with that, I think we'll close it out.